Hi, this is TJR, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the latest album by the Rolling Stones. Now, I first want to preface this is not an actual review of the album. This is really more about some thoughts that occurred to me as I listened to this album, and a question I'd like to ask, and hopefully you might want to contribute to the discussion as well. Now, first of all, the latest album by the Rolling Stones is called Blue and Lonesome. This album has no original material. It's an all-covers album, and it's all blues covers. Now, I'm sure many fans of the Rolling Stones, many classic rock fans, even some casual fans might know that, of course, the Rolling Stones their primary influence was blues music. And if you read Keith Richards' autobiography, Life, he will describe how during their very early days in London, their goal was not to become rock stars or the greatest rock and roll band in the world. Their goal was to become the best blues band in London. They had no aspirations about creating original material. Nobody in the band considered themselves a songwriter. When they first started to make records, they just started recording covers of their musical idols. And at the time, their manager said to them, well, you're going to get away with this so far because the kids don't know these are covers that you're doing. But eventually, you're going to have to write your own songs. And he kind of forced, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards to start writing material. And then, of course, they became so much more than a blues band. I mean, they became a rock band, and they became one of the world's greatest rock bands. And they wrote and recorded some extremely influential records. But on this album here, which is all blues covers, I don't see this album as just sort of a novelty record. Let's just put out a covers album. I really see this album as the Rolling Stones coming full circle, right back to their beginnings. Once again, the first couple of Rolling Stones albums were all covers. And once again, if you read Keith Richards' autobiography, Life, he talks about how when they finally came to America and met some of their blues heroes, they were shocked. They were shocked to find that Muddy Waters was actually painting the ceilings, painting the walls to Sun Studios to earn extra money. And they were shocked at, how forgotten their idols were in America. But the blues revival that began in England and all the different bands that began to rediscover American blues, or I should say discover American blues, and then begin to record their own records, eventually would lead to the rediscovery of blues music in America. And as more of these British bands, like the Rolling Stones, came to America, became popular, it began to reignite interest in American blues. And a lot of blues artists began to see their careers reignited again. Even before many of these blues artists saw their careers begin to, get a second win. In the book, Life, there are incidents where Keith Richards, meets with a lot of his heroes, some of his heroes, and they say to him, hey, we really appreciate what you're doing. Because they were taking their music and then representing it now to a younger audience. And then many of them later also, once again, were very appreciative of bands like the Rolling Stones because it really helped reintroduce their music and helped them to get their careers back and go back on the road again and be able to make records again. And so this leads me to a question. What happened to the blues? What has happened to the blues? Now I realize blues music has not gone away. There's lots of blues artists out there making new records. You can find, blues records if you go online or go to specialty stores. I know it's out there, of course, and there are people performing it. But what I notice is it's not a huge part of our mass culture right now. And by way of comparison, let's look at country music. During the 70s, 80s, country music was kind of taking a dive in popularity in terms of cultural impact. And then sometime during the late 80s, early 90s, began the new country music revival. At least that's what I call it. New country was suddenly coming out on the radio airwaves, and there were new country music stations. And people were saying, you know, I used to not like country music before, but I like this new country music. And I remember listening to it and thinking, hey, it sounds a lot like blues, but sung by cowboys, you know, blues with a bit of a yodel, with a twang, but basically it was sounding like blues. And then the rest of it was sounding like, once again, rock, but rock just a little lighter. I remember some musician friends of mine would jokingly refer to it as diet rock. For a while there, traditional country artists couldn't get airplay on country music radio. When Johnny Cash started working with Rick Rubin and made that series of great albums that he did with him, you know, country radio refused to play him. I believe it was the CMAs who refused to acknowledge him as country music in their awards. And so Johnny Cash became Americana, and he transcended country. And I think that's what happened to a lot of traditional country artists. The more traditional country artists they sounded, the more they just became Americana artists. And personally, I didn't care for a lot of this new country music that was coming out at this time period. And to me, it felt like a facade. It wasn't really country music, in my opinion. Once again, it just felt like, you know, watered down blues or watered down rock. But a lot of people really did like it. And country music's prominence in the culture began to rise. And for better or for worse, I remember saying even back then, country music had to do something, you know, because it was becoming more and more irrelevant in the culture. And so they did do something, and they changed, they modified, they adapted. And for a while there, country music, I remember, began to continue to sound less and less and less and less like country music, to where aside from the twang in the voice, that was the only real thing that identified as country, was you had some twang in the voice and someone with a cowboy hat on singing it. Otherwise, it's had no resemblance to what we would refer to as, I would refer to as, traditional country music. I remember having an argument with a friend who I'll just say was a bit on the arrogant side and had little musical education, who loved the new country music, which is fine, that's his prerogative. But I tried to get him to accept the idea, sure, it's okay if you like this music, I have nothing against that, but you have to acknowledge this is not really country music. And he kept insisting that it was, you know, and he said I was elitist for saying that it wasn't. And I remember I said to him, well, you know, Willie Nelson also feels that most of this new country music is not really country music. And I said to him, who am I going to trust, you or Willie Nelson? I think I'm going to trust Willie Nelson on this one. I remember at one point there was a song by Kid Rock and Sheryl Crow called Photograph, that at the time it came out, I said publicly, you know, this sounds more authentically country. This song by two rock, you know, artists sounds more authentically country than anything I'm hearing out of, you know, currently coming out of, you know, the country music scene. But as time has gone on, we have begun to see a move towards more traditionalism, where more and more modern country artists are embracing their roots again, and are either fully on embracing their roots or are finding ways to combine both the modern with the traditional and sounding and feeling more authentically like country music. We have also seen groups like, say, Blackberry Smoke, who the line between them sounding like heavy rock and them sounding like traditional country is so blurred, even I'm not sure what to make of it. I think it's really good, but I'm not sure how to classify it. The only thing that might classify it as country is once again, the certain aspects of how the songs are played and certain inflections in how it's sung, but it's just as much heavy rock as it is country. And I love Blackberry Smoke. I think they're a great band. And I like this kind of crossbreeding of genres, and I like when it becomes harder to distinguish and it just becomes something new and exciting. You've probably heard that cliche of, you know, how there would be these, you know, black blues artists, rhythm blues artists, who would say, you know, their music was stolen by white kids. And the truth is, yes, there were some black blues musicians who felt that their music had been appropriated, stolen from them. But then there were others who said, hey, this is reintroducing us again. And you had guys like Muddy Waters, who was, in America was now painting the ceilings at Chess Records, and then began to realize, wait a minute, I can go to England now. I can tour there. They'll pay to see me. They'll be thrilled to hear me perform. But once again, during the late 80s, early 90s, when blues music was being appropriated, so to speak, again, this time by modern country music, there was no real revival of blues. It didn't lead to any interest in blues. And part of it might have been the fact that, unlike the British bands who were covering these songs from famous blues artists, you didn't really have that happening in modern country. They were writing new songs, but once again, pretty much playing them as straight up blues, just once again, singing with a cowboy hat and singing with a twang. So this leads me back to the question, what happened to the blues? Why has there been no blues revival like there was a country music revival? Why has there been no attempt to modernize blues so that it can get on the radio? And we could see what happened in the late 80s, early 90s happen with blues music, where suddenly you have modern blues and modern blues stations. Could that happen? And of course, there are going to be some blues enthusiasts who will say, we don't want to see that happen. We don't want to see blues compromise itself and have to give in to mainstream demands in order to get on the radio. And I kind of don't blame them. Country music had to go through this, really, in my opinion, awful time. Not commercially, certainly. It was very successful, but I think artistically, this really awful time before they could re-engage, before it could re-engage with its roots again and re-engage with what makes it country music. And of course, even if there was some new creation of what we would refer to as modern blues, the equivalent of modern country back during the late 80s, early 90s, would that still lead to modern blues radio stations? Could that even happen in today's world right now? Now, I realize, of course, that there are plenty of people who are always reinventing the blues. This goes all the way back to artists like Stevie Ray Vaughan. We see it today with artists like Joe Bonamassa, who are reinventing blues and making it fresh and exciting, but they just simply can't get on the radio. Who knows? Maybe what happened with country music back during the late 80s, early 90s, maybe that was just a perfect storm. Just certain forces happened to just come together at the right time to create that scene and to create that cultural momentum that happened. Now we live in an age of fragmented media, and media is so much more fragmented than it was 20 years ago, that maybe now it's going to be impossible for any one music genre to suddenly swell up and become this huge cultural thing. I think and if that's so, then the last example we're going to see of that is going to be rap and hip hop. And I don't know, who knows what the future holds. But could there be a future for blues music? What might happen? I know this is terribly naive of me to say this, but wouldn't it be something if a new album by the Rolling Stones could help reintroduce blues to a whole new audience? It's too naive, I know it is. But still, wouldn't it be nice? At any rate, this is TJR, and I really want to hear your thoughts and comments on this. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.